My name's Richard Sadowski. I was born on the 28th of June 1948 in a little town called Darwin in Germany. My parents were both Polish. They were classified as displaced persons after the war. My mother was 16. My father would have been 14 when the Germans invaded Poland, and they were dragged out of the country and put to work elsewhere in Germany. We came out to Australia in about 1951, arrived in Brisbane. My father then went to find some work, so he decided he'd go fencing contracting out in Western Queensland. Consequently, we didn't see him sometimes for maybe 9 months at a time. So those first few years were very strange without a father around, just a mother. And then of course when my father came home, it wouldn't be long, 9 months later there'd be another child born, which is the way things happen. So in the end there ended up being 5 of us. So my brother and 2 other sisters were born in Australia. Went to school in Brisbane, moved suburbs from Ashgrove to Mitchelton. Had a good time growing up in Brisbane. It was still fairly rural at that time. Did an apprenticeship as an electrician, and then the Vietnam War started up. Conscription was brought in. I received a letter from the government to say that after I got my number came up in the ballot, I got a letter from the government to say that I'd be deferred until I was 21 because I wasn't an Australian-born citizen, although I was a naturalised citizen. Apparently that was true of quite a few nationalities. So in 1969, I got called up, went down to Singleton, did my rookie training, then down to Puckapunyal, did my core training as a truck driver. They asked you what posting you'd like, and I and quite a few other people said, well, after all this, we want to go to Vietnam. That's the whole idea, isn't it? Getting called up, you've got to go to Vietnam. But anyway, they posted me to Townsville. But in the interim, I had to go to Canungra as a relief driver there, which I found was a really, really good job because we used to get weekends off and things like that. It was really good. So anyway, when that posting finished, I went up to Townsville. I was there for a few months, and I got called into the office, and they said, do you still want to go to Vietnam? And I said, yes, I do. And the bloke says, well, you have to extend your service by 2 months because you haven't got enough time left. Oh, all right. So I signed on the dotted line extended my service for another 2 months. So in January 71, I went over to Vietnam. I was a truck driver in 1st Australian Reinforcement Unit. Around about September, there was a change in the government's position in Vietnam, and they started to call people back. So I came back, and as it turned out, I ended up having to kill that 2 months extra in Australia, which I wasn't real happy about, but that's the way it was. My time in Vietnam, I found quite interesting. To me, it was like an adventure because of the fact that we had national servicemen there. So you could have national servicemen in a infantry battalion, and half of them might be out of their time halfway through the tour. So they'd have to send replacements over there or reinforcements. So they went into 1ARU. They did an in-country course, usually for a couple of weeks, to get them used to being there and that. and then they got posted to the units that they were supposed to be going to. But as a truck driver, I was posted to 1 ARU for the whole duration, and it was at Nui Dat. Basically, it was carrying troops around for different places, and then the whole base, Nui Dat base, filling up water tanks around the place, carting fuel, just whatever. Sometimes you'd have to get in the Land Rover and take a major here or there or whatever. I was never anywhere in danger. I didn't know anybody personally that was killed or wounded. I suppose the biggest issues were the attitudes that we confronted when we came back. Came back on a Hercules. We landed in Darwin in the middle of the night, and then down to Sydney, and then it was a regular commercial flight from Sydney to Brisbane, and my mate that had been in Vietnam at the same time as me, he was already back, so I rang him up and he came and picked me up from the airport. When I got back, went home to Mitchelton. There was a letter there waiting for me from the local parliamentarian, and it basically stated that due to the fact that I hadn't lived in my electorate for the last whatever it was, he could see no reason why I shouldn't be struck off the electoral roll. And I thought, surely he could have done a little bit of homework and known that I was in Vietnam. That's why I wasn't living in the electorate. But anyway, I got over that by just tearing it up and throwing it in the bin. So I hung around Brisbane for a while, went back to my old job. Didn't work out too well at home. Things just didn't seem to fit anymore, which that reminds me now of another issue that when I went home, my parents didn't even know I was coming home. And there wasn't that much of there wasn't a lot of expression there when I got there either, but anyway, that's the way it goes. But a short time later, I organised a bit of a piss up at home at my parents' place with all my old mates and that. So they come around, we had a few beers and that, and talked about this. So there was 3 of us there who'd been to Vietnam out of, say, 7 or 8. That was all right. And then my father made the statement that it wasn't a real war anyway. And I suppose that was probably the first nudge out the door for me. Well, shortly after that, I went and it was probably about time anyway that I left home. He regretted saying it years later, but because the damage had been done. My friends were still the same, but most of them had either got married or were heavily into a relationship. So another friend of mine I did my electrical apprenticeship with, he also went to Vietnam same time as I did. So we decided, well, let's get out of here for a while and go and see what the rest of Australia's like. So we loaded up his Datsun 1600 and went to Alice Springs, had a look around there, came up to Darwin. Money was running out, so we looked for some employment. Wasn't difficult to do if you've got a trade. As an electrician, no worries at all. And I've been here ever since. Living in Darwin has certainly had some more adventurous times, especially during Cyclone Tracy. Probably one of the things that has affected me most in my life is the sound of Cyclone Tracy. After Cyclone Tracy, they put together some footage and soundtracks and they used to have a little room set aside at the old Fanny Bay jail, and you could go in there. You take your visitors up there from down south. You go in there and you have a look, and they'd show you this footage, and then they'd put on the soundtrack. Well, I had to leave. I could not sit there and listen to that soundtrack. It was pretty gruesome. We had a little tin shed just over past the house there, and no power or water or anything like that. It was sort of like camping in luxury, I suppose, really. And but anyway, the night of Cyclone Tracy, we went to a Christmas party in Stewart Park in town. Now, you have to remember that prior to this, there'd been some warnings about cyclones that never happened, and everyone was feeling pretty blasé about the whole thing. So anyway, comes midnight, and glass windows and doors and things are starting to move in and out of this place that we were at, and we thought, it's time to go home. And at the time I had a 1973 Nissan Patrol with a canvas top. So my wife and I got into the car, and we also had a Christmas tree which I'd borrowed from work, and it was a bit longer than the car, so the back of the tarp on the car was open and this tree was hanging out the back. So we headed out, and we got as far as Winnelly, where the old Way building used to be, the Way Bridge, and the car stopped. The rain was horizontal, and the old Nissans used to have cutouts up near the windscreen, and the water got in there, and the coil sat right there where the water was coming in, shorted it out. That was it. A little while later, a security bloke come along in his car and asked if he could do anything, and I said, oh, if you could tow us off the road and down beside the Weybridge building would be nice. So he did that, took us off the road, around beside the Weybridge building, and we sat there. And the wind got louder and louder, and the tarp was flapping around. So we got out of the front seats and we huddled down in the back of the car. And it was so cold. I can remember it was so freezing cold because we were dressed for summer. Anyway, there was a bit of a lull there, and I thought, I'm going to get rid of this tree. So I got out of the car, went around the back, undid the back, pulled the tree out. The tree just disappeared into the darkness somewhere. Zipped it all up at the back again, got into the car, and I mustn't have closed the door properly. So I'm sitting there huddling away thinking I better crawl in the back, and the door flew open and just flopped around on the hinges and then just dropped off. So we waited a little bit longer, jumped out again, grabbed the door with two hands, hopped in the car and jammed it right in. And then we got in the back again. And then must have been during the second half. Yeah, the second half of the cyclone, there was that lull, and a lot of people started coming out of the caravan park, which is right beside the Weybridge. And they smashed open the door of the Weybridge building and all crammed into that. And then the wind started up again, and you could hear rubbish bins flying through the air. Just everything was just going ballistic. About 7 o'clock in the morning, it had all died off. It was still drizzling rain and whatnot. So we got the car started, headed off home for Humpty Doo. Trees down all over the place. Got home, there was one tree here, missed the generator, which was good. So that was the only damage we had out here, but we didn't have much trees in that here then. It was nearly all spear grass. But yeah, it was people who come up here of more recent times and say they want to see a cyclone just to experience it. Well, they should go and do it somewhere else, because I don't want to experience it again. It's quite horrifying. When I left Brisbane, I didn't talk about my involvement in Vietnam until about probably maybe 1990. I just blocked it out. Nobody seemed to be interested anyway. And a lot of people that I worked with, the first mob I worked for was a local electricity supply mob. I was with them for 7 years. Nobody there even knew that I was a Vietnam veteran, because there was you just felt like it was a subject that was retired, closed, don't say any more about it. And I never went to any RSL things. I can't remember when I first started going to Anzac Days. Probably was about 1990 as well. Then they had the Welcome Home Parade in Canberra, and I'd been a member of the motorcycle club then by about 2 or 3 years. So I was going to ride down for it, because all the chapters in Australia were going to meet in Canberra. Big thing. Anyway, I got into South Australia, a place called Warnertown, and some gentleman who needed a top up of alcoholic refreshments decided I wasn't on the road, and he just ploughed into me. So I spent a week or so in hospital in Adelaide. That was pretty traumatic too. Not the injury, just they had it on TV in the ward where I was, and I just buried my face in a pillow for the whole thing. I really wanted to be there, and it was not good. Not a good time in my life then. No, personally, I've got no real ill effects from my time in Vietnam, but I have friends that did. Yeah, certainly one of the friends I grew up with, it hit him really hard, and alcohol was a sort of panacea. And, but he's come good now. The Veterans Affairs have helped him out eventually. I think Veterans Affairs, right from the very beginning, the government should have said everybody that goes to Vietnam has free medical when they come back. It would have saved a lot of angst, I think. Yeah, people come back not knowing. They know there's something wrong with them, but how are you going to get help for it? Two of us, myself and the other fellow that was also an electrician at the time, we went back to Vietnam in about 1990, I think. And one other mate of ours. And it was a sort of like putting the ghosts at rest type thing. We spent about, a week or so over there, toured around a bit. And when we came back, we had a little yarn about it to see what were your thoughts about it. And we all agreed that we should have had our wives with us, because when we went over there, you couldn't unload to your mates because they had their own unloading to do. And it was just like a light came on and thought, I should have had my wife there. I could have told her about this, that, and other thing. But anyway, another opportunity goes by. In most conflicts, there's action and then there's a heap of boredom in between. So we had a wet canteen, which got frequented quite heavily. Alcohol was very cheap, like 13 cents a can. And because we got paid in monopoly money, MPC, military payment certificates, which looked like monopoly money, so the nearest value was 10 cents or 15. So every now and then we'd get a 10-cent night. So we would drink even more alcohol. Cigarettes were dirt cheap. And it would sometimes happen that we'd get a stand to after we've had a night on the grog. All the lights would go off, the sirens would start wailing, and we'd all have to stumble back to our hoochies, grab our weapons, and then down to whatever pit you'd been assigned to. And there was teeth lost and all sorts of weird things. people chundering up against trees. And, yeah. But yeah, I mean, after a while, when you first get there, you're on tenterhooks. Anything that goes, boom, you're up there. You're well and truly, with it. But after you've been there, like, for some people it might be 3 months, for some might be 6 months. But eventually, yeah, it's one of those again. And you just roll with it. Quite a lot more different to those poor blokes that were out on patrol out in the jungle. Although at 1ARU we did do TAORs, the Tactical Area of Responsibility. So every unit that was on the perimeter had a section that they were in charge of, and you'd have to send out, I think it was usually about a 5-man party after dark, or you'd go out before dark and you'd set up an ambush position and just sit there all night waiting for somebody to go past. I went on about 3 of those, I suppose. So that was something different. And of course the first time, well, you're up all night, your eyes are wide open. Wait, what's that noise? What's that noise? And yeah. But by the end it was flat out staying awake then. Yeah. Being with the bike club has probably been a real godsend for me. So when we run our own Anzac Day service, and it's open to the public, but we make sure that all the bike clubs in Darwin area know about it, and we get really, really good support. And it's good to see like-minded people, and they're not there just to look at bikes, they're there to commemorate Anzac Day. Yeah, so it's good. I like that. Yeah. And we don't allow politicians to speak. We don't have any guest speakers that are politicians. It seems that the whole thing seemed to have started with Vietnam, when it was all that sort of brought it to light for people. But the suicide rate with the younger veterans seems to be, at a much higher level. And why that is, I don't know. It could be because some of those blokes are doing 2 or 3 rotations, whereas with us, if you were a national serviceman, you only ever did 1. Some of the old regs, or the regular army people, they might have done 2. Yeah, I don't know. And I suppose it's really hard to say, because if you haven't been there, you don't know what they're facing. You can only guess what they're facing and what's causing the high suicide rate. Is it what they've experienced in country, or is it what they're experiencing in Australia due to lack of help? I don't know. I'm an optimist. The glass is always half full, it's never half empty. There's always a solution to a problem. My wife reminds me about things like that all the time, because we used to do a lot of camping, and the number of times the car broke down, and she was horrified, but we always got home. I always found a way to get home, and she has to admit that that's true. So I think if you look at things with a positive outlook, it'll always work out better, no matter how shitty it is. If you're positive about it, some good will come out of it. Yeah. And I think for those people that there seems to be a class of people that are overeducated. They've been to university, they've got more degrees than you can poke a stick at, but they haven't got one skerrick of real life experience under their belt. And for those people who think that when there's an armed conflict on, you can negotiate your way out of it without an armed force behind you, you should jump on the first space shuttle available and head off to that imaginary utopia before it's too late, because it's not on this planet. There is no such thing. You will always need an armed force. Yeah, had kids up there, got married, had 3 kids, still got 3 kids, got 5 grandkids. I took my eldest grandson, who's just 9, on the Christmas toy run on Sunday on the back of my motorbike, and he was pretty thrilled about that. So hopefully there'll be many more to come, but he's not going to go every time. Somebody else will have to get a go as well. But yeah, that's another thing that keeps me in Darwin, that my 3 girls and my 5 grandkids are all here, so yeah, no reason for me to go. It's getting hotter. Some things are not as nice as they used to be, but I can't think of anywhere better to live. I love Darwin, I'm staying here. That's about it, I think.